Oh, get my headset. Sure.
Hi, Professor. Good
Hello.
evening, everyone.
It's on. Can everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Professor, we can hear you. Yep.
Good afternoon, Professor. I have a question. Do you know how I can access to the recording?
Of the class?
The recording. If I want to listening to the recording again.
Yeah, after starting
Class.
Monday, there'll be a file. Starting on
Mhm.
Monday, there'll be a file that we'll have them. So you can see
Okay.
them, and then the date will be on the recording, and then you could look at them. The thing is, I have to there's a little bit of a process, so I have to upload them to YouTube. It's easier for students to access it through YouTube than through the whole Zoom thing that Ostos has set up. So it just takes me a little while to upload them. So I'll be doing that over the weekend. So starting Monday, you'll see the previous.
So we have school on
Thank
Monday.
you.
No, I mean starting Monday, starting next week, you'll be
Okay.
able to see them. I mean, we don't have. I'll talk about next week.
Okay.
We don't see each other at all next week, actually. Neat. Great to see your faces. Those of you who are
Hi, Professor.
letting me see your faces. So welcome back, everybody. And I think last time, I told you I was in a different time zone. I was on the West Coast. And if I didn't, that's where I was, but I am now back on the East Coast. And so we are in the same time zone. I hope people are staying dry and staying safe with the wacky weather that we're having. So, so I want to begin by most of today, I think up until a moment ago, I got to look at everyone. So if you submitted your assignment, I responded on Blackboard. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit of that so that you know how to look at them and you could begin understanding the way in which we're going to continue our conversation on the page, meaning the conversation in writing through your writing. And so just, I'm going to come 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. And I believe, so if you go now to discussions, right, this is, I'm in our classroom. If you go to discussions, the first assignment was the poetry reflection, right, that we just did, all of you, but we turned into an assignment. You know, you did some reflections in class, but it did an assignment. So right now, if you go to your name, and let me pick somebody. Let me just, is Adama in the room? Adama. Adama, is it okay if I click yours?
Okay.
Adama, if you're speaking, you're muted, but if not, you can put it in the chat. Right, then maybe, since I can see Joanny, can I click yours?
Sure.
So let me just, okay, so here's Joanny. So basically now when Joanny clicks theirs, right, they will see what they put in there, and then below me, there'll be a response. And the way it works, and this will happen, let me see, in case you need to respond to each other, but I think there may be 1 or 2 assignments. But usually I reply, and then my reply is here. One of the things that I'm doing is I usually take your reply and I put it into a Google Doc, right? It's a Google Doc when they're open assignments, like the assignment, like I consider this an ungraded assignment, right? When they're an ungraded assignment, then usually the link is a pretty open link. But when it's a graded assignment, then the link will be specific to you, so that you're the only one that can open the link, right? That way you get to see my comments, you get to see my grade. And then I'm going to do it quickly. So if I was Johanny and I looked at this, I will click, I could either click here or copy and paste, because some computers, it doesn't let Lydia in. And so you can either copy and paste this URL that's here, that's with it, not my initials, because it won't work. But if you just copy the URL, right? And I'm going to right click and copy it. You copy that and then you put it, whoops, just, then you put it in, you know, in here, then you will, I say paste and go, then I admit, then it will show the document. I'm going to close it, or usually I say click here, and there's a little hyperlink, and you should also be able to click it, and it will open the document. And so what I'm going to make this a little bigger. And so what I'm doing is, there's not too much. This is probably not a good one. Not to say it's not a good. So then in it, I will make corrections, as you can see, right? And then give you a little comment at the end. And then also, let me close this up here so we can see less of us and more of the page. And then I write comments, right? So for instance, let me see. Like, let's just look at this one, right? This line, Johanny wrote, but she is not carrying a crown, but she is a queen in his eyes. He is the only one that can see it. He no longer he says no one recognizes you. So I just changed that to who, and then I wrote a little comment here. If you click it, it says, when referring to people, use who, as opposed to use that. But that's the kind of thing, and I'll stop it here. I'll stop the share. Thank you, Johanny, for being vulnerable, but I remember yours was a good one. There was just minor things, but even the ones that write really, even students, I mean, for overall, I think the writing was really good from the reflections that I put in. And so this is an opportunity for me to say also, a lot of you submitted the assignment, but not all of you. And so those of you who submitted the assignment, we have just begun a dialogue on the page, right? That means that you're going to look at this document and you're going to see more or less how you responded, what some of your strengths are, if there's something in it that you don't understand. So those of you who didn't, I encourage you to get something in soon so that I could also comment on it, so that we begin now, right? Having a conversation on the page, so that in about a month, at the end of the month, when you have your first formal essay, we have had an opportunity to talk a little bit about, about your writing, okay? So, but I want to say overall, the responses were great. I really enjoyed reading them. Most of you understood the poems. It seemed to me it lends that the discussion we had was one that people were absorbing what was happening, and so I'm very encouraged, and it makes me happy. Okay, so folks, so we're off to the start. So I wanted to say that. So that kind of what I just shared is kind of how we will work. So going forward, you're going to have an assignment due, I don't know, like in a week or something. I'll talk about that later. And it's related also to the poems that we're gonna read, but we're gonna focus on one particular thing. So I had asked you all to read elements of poetry, and so we were just speaking together, and some of you were very wise and we're using terms that I saw from the readings. Like some of you talked about stanzas, some of you were talking about metaphors, some people were talking about imagery in the writing, and those are all terms that we will use for poetry. Terms for poetry, but they will also extend to some of the other genres that we're going to study. But what we're doing is creating the language, right? Because in anything, as a common language, if I say the word egg, something comes into your brain, right? You imagine an egg, whether it's a white egg or a brown egg or some other color egg. You imagine an egg and something that we crack open and some of us eat, right? So it's about creating language that if somebody were to say something as a metaphor, that word, and maybe you hear that word a lot, that it's important for all of us to be on the same page with what the terms mean, and that we can talk about poetry in a way, in a more expansive way. So, right, instead of saying it gave me a good feeling, or it gave me, like, I can see what was happening, right? We can say, they were using imagery, and the imagery was painting a picture, and that, you can say more about the poetry. So let me just get the, I keep forgetting I can't do that. I'm going to open up elements of poetry, and I talked a little bit about it the last class we were together, but I'm going to talk some more today, more in depthly today, and we'll go through the different. So for any of you, I'm sure you all saw it, and I'm pretty sure I sent it in a link, but if not, it was the elements of poetry overview. I'm going to speak from it a little bit. So, so if you read the handout, and I know all of you did, the handout talks about like that everybody has read a poem. And right now I could say definitely everybody in this class has read a poem, because we've read at least 2 together. So everybody, no poetry virgins, everybody's read a poem, at least the students in my class, right? But sometimes poems are everywhere. I mean, in New York City, we're lucky to have poetry in the subway. So if anybody rides the subway, there's this whole campaign to include poetry in different parts of the train, as when there are ads, there's poems. So that's one. Poetry is often used in television shows. It's used in advertising. In our poetry packet, you'll see that Tupac Shakur, who was known as a rapper, was also a poet. So it's also in music. Very often, musicians or songwriters are poets as well, because they use poetry in their music to create their lyrics. And so I'm just trying to, I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking at the poetry handout. So so one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about Pablo Neruda and the Queen, we started getting into, and when we spoke about first poem for you, we started talking about how the poets used the word, right? The example was the crystal crown, that they could have used golden crown, the jewel crown, whatever, the golden crown, but they used the word crystal because crystal has more meaning, right? It's precious, it's fragile, it's clear, right? It could be almost invisible. And it was making a connection to some of the ideas inside of the poem. So you think of poets the way painters use different paints to create the painting, in a way poets use words to create an idea or feeling. I talked about the last time briefly the three main types. There's many types of poems, but there's three main. And for this class anyway, there's the narrative poem, which is one that kind of tells a story, right? It's almost as a, and sometimes even looks like prose, right? There's something called the prose poem too, but a narrative poem tells a story, right? And there's some great ones that you may study in other English classes, like the Greeks did a lot of those. So there's like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and both by a writer named Homer. Those are very, very famous kind of narrative poems. They call them even, they're also epic poems. There's also dramatic poetry, and I said we will encounter that more when we do theater, right? And sometimes those dramatic poems could be a monologue or a soliloquy that's in it. And Shakespeare, very often, I shouldn't say always, but very often included soliloquies in his, or monologues, dramatic monologues in his play. And William Shakespeare, if you haven't heard his name, you're hearing it now. English poet and playwright, and most famously known for his plays. I think some people know his plays, and many of them have been made into movies, like, but the plays are Romeo and Juliet and Julius Caesar and many others. But Shakespeare did that. And then lyric poetry is the type of poetry that comes to mind for most people. And that's the kind of poems that we're going to be looking at most closely in this class. And so it's more about using elements like rhyme and rhythm. Poems don't have to rhyme, but rhyme is very often used in lyric poetry. It's also about evoking a feeling, and sometimes also a thought, makes us think, makes us feel. If you think back to the poem of the Queen, it was really about like many of you said in your statements, like how someone is expressing their love for someone else, right? And they're giving us one of you broke it down stanza by stanza and was like, first they compared them to others, and then they declared them the queen, and then they talked about how it made them feel, and then at the end talked about the unity, right? So there was an arc to that poem. There was not, could we call that a story? I don't know if it's necessarily a story, but it was definitely a flow and arc to the story. There was an order, an organization to it. But it was really about evoking, leaving you with this idea of this, I think as Greg said in the class, like beauty's in the eye of the beholder, this idea that when you love somebody, that you see them in a particular way, that you see them in a way that sometimes not even other people see them. There's also a phrase that, like for a baby, like everybody thinks their babies are the most beautiful baby in the world, right? And not all babies are cute, but most are. But not all of them are cute, but they're like only a baby, only a mama could love, right? That's a phrase that floats around. So, but lyric poems are the poems that we're going to be looking at most closely. So they explore different forms, they explore different types. It's about ideas and feelings, about the human condition. And the idea of lyric poetry comes from part of its origin, right? The origin is of this particular kind of recitation of poems, like somebody speaking them, right? They were spoken, and then somebody accompanied them with music, and they use a lyre. Lyre is the lyre. And lyre is kind of a horseshoe thing, like a little harp. Like a harp is a big thing with strings on it, and it creates all this beautiful sound. But a lyre is smaller. You can hold it and create the sound. So you may have seen them in movies or something like that of, ancient Rome and all that. So, or in ancient Greece, so what happens is that, so from the lyre, so that's why it was poetry that was accompanied by a lyre. And so a lyre sounds like lyric. And so that's how they became, the idea of lyric poems, right? And then if you hear lyrics, right? Lyrics are also what we hear in songs. So there is that connection between poetry and music. And so I want to speak a little bit also about prose versus verse, right? So in prose, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see some of this. You can see the handout. So, so prose, what basically, if you look at the way this is written on the page, this paragraph here, right? The lines breaks are at the end of the margin, right? Even the handout, right? The line breaks go from the margin to margin. And if there's no spaces because of the letter or something, that is basically how prose is done. Prose is also how we're used to hearing and reading. The newspaper are written in prose. The books, novels are written in prose. So that is what prose is, right? So the way in which this, the organization of words, the organization of ideas, the flow on the page. Verse is what we're using is a lot of poetic composition, right? That verse is sometimes the line breaks may be different. There's about the syllables and the rhythms and the beats and the flow of the words. We talk a little bit about meter. We'll spend a little bit of time. We don't spend a lot of time about meters. And then the lines, they're also called verses in poems, but the paragraphs are called stanzas, right? So just understanding that prose are run by different rules, right? By the organization of sentences, full sentences, the margins dictate when the end of the line is, and in verse, it's not necessarily so. And here I give you an example of so here's a excerpt from a book called Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And I'll just read it just so you can hear the words, right? It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in the want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of someone or other of their daughters, right? So that's also Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice was written early 1900s. So the way in which people talked and expressed themselves might be different than the way we talk and express ourselves today. And but that paragraph is basically saying that a universal truth that if a man is single and he got some money, that he must want a wife, right? All men who are single must have money, must want a wife. And then it doesn't matter when she says, however little known feelings or views of such men may be, regardless of what that man is feeling, that's the assumption the society makes when he comes into a neighborhood. And that truth, they say, is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he's considered the rightful property of some or other of their daughters, right? There was I totally drew a blank on the name of it. There was a series last year. Goodness. Does anybody know what I'm trying for? The series I'm trying for. Let me stop sharing for a second. There was a series on Netflix about like a courtship. It took place back in the day. Anyway, forget about it. I'll remember it later.
Is it Bridgerton?
Yes.
Yes, that's what
You win the Brig Award. Thank you for Bridgerton. Anybody see that? Raise your hand or put the.
Yes.
Right. And it was all about that. It was like this Duke, and of course he must want to get married, and everybody wants to want to get married. And if they have money, it's part of it. So that's what that phrase is about. But anyway, the point of that is not to go too deep into what that phrase is about. It's for you to be able to hear some prose and also to and understand a little bit. So with the verse, this is a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. And Edgar Allan Poe, if people don't know, lived in the Bronx. So if you ever go up to Kingsbridge on Fordham Road, there's a little cottage that's Poe's cottage. And they built a bigger center next to it. And Edgar Allan Poe was a writer. He's not from New York City, but the last place he lived was in the Bronx. And there's a little house where his wife died in that house, his wife, Virginia. Here's Edgar Allan Poe. I'm just going to read it to you so you can hear another poem. And this is Dream Within a Dream. And then again, remember, he's writing about a different time period, in a different time period. So he says, take this kiss upon thy brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore less gone? All that we see or seen is but a dream within a dream. So if you remember the exercise we were doing the other day when we were together, I would read a poem, I'd pause, I'd read it again, and then we break it down, right? So I'm not going to do that right now with this necessarily, but I'm going to go back to the beginning of it. So if we said that verse in terms of poetry, right? If you notice here that the lines are not going to the end of the page, right? They don't go to the end of the page. They break where he wants them to break. There is something musical, right? And we're gonna talk about the meters of this. There's a rhythm that he's doing. I want you to draw your attention to, he is working with rhyming: brow, now, avow, deem, dream, away, day, none, gone, seem, dream. So if you notice, he's ending the lines. There's a rhyme pattern that's going on with the lines, right? There's brow, now, avow, deem, dream, away, day. So he's doing that. So this is here for us to look at this and see a little bit about the structure, the physical structure of how it looks in the page, and then look at least at one poetic element that he's using, and that's rhyming, right? So again, I put here, however you can write in verse without worrying about rhyming. This is the case of blank verse and metric beats, and verse is obviously used in poetry. And sometimes verse is synonymous with the word poetry, but I like to keep them apart because not all poems are verse, right? And not all verse is poem. So, so really difference between prose and verse here, just a little summary. Prose is meant to mimic natural speech, the way we speak and think, right? All verses focus on creating rhythm and cadence. When you read an everyday text, it's almost surely in prose. Prose does not usually rhyme, right? While verse usually rhymes or can rhyme. However, as you've seen, there are exceptions. Prose does not measure metric lines. When you're reading prose, I can tell you as a fiction writer, well, that's not true. Sometimes I think about rhythm in my prose, but they don't normally measure metrics and lines. While in verse, it's important to pay attention to the way language is organized. And then prose sets words into sentences and paragraphs, while verse sets them in lines that can be sentences and sometimes in stanzas, which, in prose would be paragraph. So in other words, verse uses line breaks creatively while prose doesn't. All right, and poetry could be either verse or prose. Now, I want to talk about a little bit about theme and subject. I think I'm going to focus today more on theme, right? Poetic theme is the main point of that the author is trying to convey, right? There may be more than one theme, but that's the main point. So the theme is the lesson that the readers, sometimes can be the lesson that leaders learn about life after reading a poem. Another way to think of theme is the moral of the poem. Many poets have a thematic focus on a major life issue, such as love or death or independence. And so it could be any of these things, right? So I'm going to pause and stop sharing my screen because we read 2 poems, right? And some of you were talking about that. So in Pablo Neruda, what would you say in The Queen? What would you say might be like a theme inside of it? And you can write it in the chat or just unmute yourselves. What might be a theme, a main point, a main idea that Pablo Neruda was trying to convey in The Queen?
Love through someone's eyes.
Love through, yes. Like, I mean, if you love through a person's eyes, right? From a perspective, definitely. And I think, we identified one was, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think that was Greg's offering, right? Was that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the other thing I was thinking, it was eternal love. Internal love.
Yeah. And there's eternal love is one, but there's all kinds of love, right? That this one was saying, like, right? Respectful, there's all these other ideas, these main ideas. Anybody else with a theme with it? With The Queen?
There are the reciprocity of this affection.
I was
The
going to say that.
And
you were going to say exactly that, the same exact words,
okay.
The reciprocity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the mutualness, right? There was a sense of like, it wasn't just this, there's a phrase called unrequited love. Have anybody heard of unrequited love? That phrase? Unrequited love is when one person loves the other, but the other one doesn't love them back, right? And that causes so much suffering, doesn't it? Right? So, but this is not about unrequited love, right? The Queen is about mutual love, right? So as we can see, we can cherry pick, or we can still talk some more about, but that inside of a poem, there may be like a main idea, but if you just pause a little bit and think, there's more in them. What about first poem for you? the Kinetonesia poem? What do you think some of the themes inside of that poem could be?
Fear.
Say more about fear.
I would say fear to love. She knew every part of him, the way she described his body and the tattoos and how they form. Even though it was in the dark, she was able to say where it was.
Mhm.
But there was something that she couldn't really open up totally. And she wanted to surpass that, but there was something that she knew that she couldn't go
Mhm.
and go through that. And that blocked her from being completely vulnerable, I would say.
Right. So you talked about two things, fear of love, and you talked about the fear of being vulnerable. Some of you talked about in your responses, the fear of commitment, right? The fear of permanence, the fear of loss, right? So you could talk, so if you heard that, the way fear looks so many different kinds of ways inside of this one poem, right? You could write a whole essay exploring fear in Kinetonia's first poem for you. How many people just thought, Professor, that sounds crazy? Anybody think that?
No,
Or you were
not me.
like,
Yeah.
When I read the poem and we read it over again together, maybe it's my dark side, but I found it to be really passionate, very real.
Mhm.
Because relationships are not perfect. And for me, how she was describing the tattoos on her partners, and I say partner because I didn't know if it was a man or a woman. It was just about life and the challenges of relationship and how she saw this positive, like she was so amused and turned on by this, how do I say, unknown
Mhm.
in her relationship and the struggle and the passion at the same, like she spoke about the passion, the struggle, the dark side of it, but also the good side of it, and for me, that's what relationship is. So that's why I found it to be so passionate. I mean, it was like really strong, like.
Yeah, there's like so much inside of that poem. I think you said this right now a few moments ago, but somebody else wrote this in their response. They talked about how it took place in the dark, right? And that the poem, if you think about it, it's one moment. She's laying in bed after having sex with her lover and having these thoughts. This is what she's doing. There's a term called post-coital, like when you coitus is like, sexual contact, but post-coital, like after you've done it. And she's laying there, and this is what's going on in her brain, right? And all of this stuff is the processing, right? The touching and all that. But the idea of being in the dark, right? Like what does being in the dark also mean? When somebody says, "Oh, you're in the dark."
In the unknown.
I
Yes.
believe in this is Shaquana. So I believe it means that pretty much that there's not like a real serious open communication, more or less. Like you know how some people can honestly say like, hey, I 100% know this to be a fact, or I know the truth about everything. I think that's what it intends. Honestly, I think the poem overall, because I think some people have like this imaginary thought in their head of how love should be. And I think the poem just overall expresses, the real perspective of what love really is, because, love can sometimes be hard. Love can sometimes be hard, easy, you have your moments
Really?
like,
Shaquana, are you sure?
because every day is not like, sunshine and moon stars and lucky charms like we're meant to believe, honestly.
Okay.
Love does take, time to work, to build a foundation. And sometimes you are happy. Most times you should be happy in love, but that's not realistic. Every day is not all about happiness. You're going to have your moments where you don't want to be around a person. You're going to have your moments where you need your space. And it might not be about the relationship itself, but it could be about outside circumstances
Mhm.
or trials and tribulations that you're going through. But I think it just gives a realistic perspective versus moonshine and Lucky Charms and happy stars, you know?
That's
So
so
I think
true.
it's
I-
both. The person loves this person enough to accept everything that they come with, and also realize that, you know, even though this person may have some flaws, they love them anyway.
Yeah. I want to bring us to what you said about when I talked about the term in the dark, and you said that you don't know the truth or the whole truth. And that is part of that. And right before you started speaking, somebody said the unknown, right? I
Yeah,
don't know
that
who
was
said that.
me.
Okay,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say that idea of the unknown, but I was gonna add on that, like, I find it interesting how both poems, like, they're in contrast to each other, in the way that in the Queen, he's like all this admiration, but where in the first poem for you, that one, it's more like you said, like passionate. It's a little
Mhm.
bit more, you know, rugged. So you see
Yeah.
both perspectives of what my love might be. And then also I was thinking about, we're seeing a female perspective and a male perspective. So I'm thinking in my head, like, what would a poem from the other party involved be like, you know?
Mhm.
And I feel like maybe those two people could also be together. And that would be like two different perspectives on how their experience is in their relationship.
So are you saying that from the perspective of the queen as opposed to the perspective of the writer?
Well, yes. So
Okay.
I was
Or
saying
the
that
perspective of the tattooed person as opposed to the,
exactly.
right. Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
That'd be a fun, you know, you just gave me an idea for a fun exercise. Not for this class, because this is not a poetry writing class, but maybe when I teach a poetry writing class, I could do that. Have them write a poem in response to the other one, right? But yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, it's interesting, the idea of being in the dark, like she doesn't know. She's literally in the dark because it's dark, right? She's just in the dark, but she's also figuratively in the dark, right? Because she doesn't know. The idea of permanence to her is unknowing, right? And so permanence is a theme. This questioning of being in the dark is a theme inside of it.
And
We both,
sometimes love is an unknown. I'm sorry, Professor.
yes, right?
Yes,
That's what she's
love is
talking about,
also an
love.
unknown. So permanence, love. Yeah. I feel like
And the way, go ahead.
I was gonna say that in the Queen, he's more sure of him. There's more confidence in that poem, in that
Mhm.
relationship.
Right. So, so what we're doing is we're talking about some of the themes, right? And that's some of the things that's one of the ways in which you can talk about poems. You can talk about poems from the perspective of the themes, right? But we're not limited to that. We have more ways we can talk about poems. So in the handout, I gave you examples of Robert Frost, who is a very well-known American poet, and he writes a lot about nature. And so let's I'll talk about Robert Frost in a moment a little bit more. So theme is definitely one of the things. So in terms of themes, we're talking about the ideas that the poet is conveying. But there's other thing I mentioned, rhyme, right? So one of the things that poets often do is they use sound effects, right? They use sound inside of it, and by sound, rhyming is sound, right? If like we just saw like brow, now, thou, etc. If they start using, they can use rhyme inside of it. And some rhymes are direct rhymes, like brow and thou, right? And a rhyme means that the word sounds the same. There's also a kind of rhyme called a slant rhyme. And if I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna look at that little bit of that Edgar Allan Poe one, and then we'll do the Robert Frost poem. And just so you know, as we're going through these poems, you got all these poems in the poetry packet, but even the poems inside of this handout are poems that if you decide, damn it, I love that poem. That poem's so cool. I want to write about that poem. I want to write about that Robert Frost poem or the Edgar Allan Poe one. These are available to you as well to consider for to do the essay later on. But share my screen. So I'm back to this poem, you know, A Dream Within a Dream. like take this kiss upon thy brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow, right? So ow, 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 right? These here. And then he goes into dream, dream. But then let's write dream. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is there therefore less gone? So there's something none and gone, right? None and gone. They're not exactly a rhyme, right? They kind of sound like each other, but he's using it as a function, as a rhyme in there. And that just has a name. So instead of a direct rhyme or a clear rhyme, that's considered a slant rhyme. So it's a rhyme, but it's a little bit slanted, right? It's not exactly a rhyme. So that one's called a slant rhyme, okay? But sound, right, is another way you can examine them. And I will do an exercise in a moment with you with both of these, because there's also a way to look at the rhyme scheme or the rhyme pattern of a poem.
Professor, I just have a question. With slant rhyme, is it that both words mean the same, but don't sound the same?
Not necessarily, no. So like in that sense, none and gone, right? They're spelled the same almost, the endings of them, but they have a different pronunciation, but the pronunciation is close enough. So if you think of rhyme as more about the sound, right? So a slant rhyme is about a sound that they kind of sound alike, but they're not as direct as dream and deem, right?
Okay.
And if I added scream and whatever, green, all those sound are clear rhymes. Where if you say, there's this one that's used a lot, but I'll just stick with this one, gone and none. So they kind of sound alike, but they're not exact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes sense.
All right, cool. So so sound is one of the ways they're using it. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen so we can see that, and I'm keeping track of time because I want to do maybe one other poem with you today and talk about the next assignment. Okay. So so I went back too far. Okay, here. So another way that sound is used is alliteration, right? And so sometimes poets are using alliteration in it. They're playing with a lot of things or working with a lot of things, right? And alliteration is, here I put an example, is when they're using a similar sound. So in consonants, I should say, is repeating the same vowel. And here it says, the same consonant. And so the consonants are, well, the vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, people say. But every other letter that's not one of the vowels is a consonant. So in this example, mummy's mommy was no common dummy, right? In this tiny little phrase here, we could see that the M is repeated, right? And that's considered consonants, right? But if you repeat the letter only at the beginning of the word, is known as alliteration. And here there's one that's called the big brown bear bit into a blueberry. So if you see that the letter B begins almost every word, not all of them, because into A doesn't do it, but big brown bear bit into a blueberry is an example of alliteration. Thank you. So another one that people know a lot for alliteration, right, is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? Right? We know that one, right? That's another example of alliteration. And some of you who speak Spanish, there's one that's called plancha, plancha con cuatro planchas, something like that, right? Con cuatro planchas, plancha, plancha.
Sancho, Sancho
right?
Panza, something.
They call them
so,
the tongue twisters, yeah.
Right. So that's examples of alliteration, right? So the same way that consonants exist and you repeat the consonants like, the letter B or the letter M, there's also assonance, right? And that's when you repeat the vowels or you hold the vowels. And sometimes assonance is considered melodious, like there's a flow when you hold vowels. And that's why songs, if you notice songs, you hold vowels, right? Very often when people are singing songs, they hold sounds like, I'm not a singer. I could do the Peter Piper thing, but I'm not a singer, but I'm a try, right? But like, the Whitney Houston song that was originally a Dolly Parton song, right? When she says, I will always love you. So it's all the vowels get held. And the idea is to create melody. I own that I don't have a melodious voice. I try and I like karaoke. And after a couple of drinks, don't erase that part. It's on too late, it's recorded. I become more bold and I want to sing more. But that's those are ideas of consonants and assonance. So I'm saying these things so we could, so when I mention them sometimes, oh, you're going to see them, you're going to read a poem, you go, oh wait, I'm noticing that this got repeated. So this must be, even if you don't remember, you run to the handout, and you can find out in the handout that at least you know it's in there and there's something in there that's talking about what the poets are doing. And what's amazing about poetry is that it's all on purpose. They do it on purpose and very often with purpose. Right? On purpose and with purpose when they're working with all of these techniques and skills. There's also automatopoeia, right? And that's when, and sometimes we hear that phrase a lot, but that's when the words sound like the sounds. Remember, we're all talking about sound, right? So alliteration, Peter Piper and pancha and plancha and all that repetitions about sound, right? And the automatopoeia, boom, right. Mabel gave us an example of automatopoeia in the chat. Boom, buzz, creak, snap, right? Those are words that try to sound like the sound that they make. That's what's considered an automatopoeia. And once I got 100 on a spelling test, and I was the only one in my class because I was able to spell that word, which is not an easy word. I was in like 6th grade, I think. So then there's euphony and cacophony, and again, euphony is more, it's related to assonance in the sense that assonance is repetition of vowels, and euphony is the use of vowels to create that sense of melody inside of it. And then cacophony is use of hard consonants like K's and B's and P's and and sometimes some hard G's could be used to do that. And we're gonna look at a poem. I think we'll do that poem today because it's an interesting poem. And then we talked about stanzas. I think I'll talk about rhyme schemes and all that stuff later on. Let's say literary effects. Oh yes. So then in addition to all the sound effects, we have literary effects. I'm going through some of this stuff fast, but we'll slow down, and I'm kind of asked, that's why I should read it because I wanted to popcorn throw things at you. But like metaphors and similes, some of you use metaphors in your thing. So tell me, you hear that word metaphor, right? In Spanish, there's metáfora, right? I hear that students say that all the time. But metaphors, what is a metaphor?
Something you use to replace something that you mean.
Close. But metaphors and similes,
Like a way of
both.
comparison.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Usually,
Definitely.
yeah. So a metaphor is like, I think more like an outrageous, very unrelated. Or is that a simile where they use like the word like or as, right?
Yeah.
Like smooth as a board or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like a simile.
What would that be? That would be
Is
an
it
example
smooth
of
as a
what?
board? I'm sorry.
What would be that's an example of?
Smooth as a board, like
A simile or a metaphor?
a simile, I was thinking.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the difference between because metaphor is used very often as a figurative speech, as a word of, and means like that something is symbolizing or is reflecting or is yes, people are in the chat comparing two things. So the difference with it is that simile uses like or as. So we say as pretty as a rose, right? The person is not a rose, right? But we're saying as pretty as a rose, using as. Or he was smart like a fox, or smart like an owl, right? So it's like, using like or as, right? Whereas sometimes, well, metaphor very often say something is that. He might say, a metaphor might be, he is a smart owl, right? Now we know he's not a smart owl, he's a person, but that's what metaphors do. Like she is a beautiful rose, right? Or he is a beautiful rose, right? so that you can
Or
separate. You
like,
can do that.
is elephant memory? Like memory like an elephant? Is that no?
Yeah, memory like an elephant would be what? A simile or a metaphor?
This is similarly.
Yes,
I'll be a
it's a simile.
metaphor.
Okay. Maybe similarly.
Right. And the key, the little clue is that you're using like or as when you're making that kind of comparison, right? So metaphors and simile are comparing things, or saying that something, the metaphor says something is something, right? Whereas the pose is if you said something like, I don't know, I'm just saying who I can see on screen. If we said Gregory's a tall tree, right? Like, I don't know if Gregory's tall enough, but we know Gregory's definitely not a tree, but you get it. You wouldn't think that Gregory's literally a tall tree. You understand that I'm making comparison, as opposed to if I would say Gregory's as tall as a tree, then you understand the difference between simile and metaphor. Let me take another look at. So, yes. So I asked you to read till page 9, right? And so I want to talk about getting one of the things that the poets do is try to use all the 5 writers in general, right? All writers. One of the things we teach creative writing, one of the ways that people can connect and relate is that you use our senses, right? Because our senses are how we experience the world, right? What you see, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch, what you feel, right? And so, so in poetry, they very often use that. So when we talk about imagery, very often, because the word image is an imagery, so you think it's about what you see in the poem, like how they describe something. But I want you to think that imagery includes all of the 5 senses, right? There's visual imagery and audio imagery and, sensory imagery. And in first poem for you, for instance, she's working with a lot of those, right? She's working with touch. She talks about touching. She talks about tracing them. She talks about kissing them, right? And a kiss, there's a connection when you kiss something, right? Otherwise, it's an air kiss, right? You blow the kiss. You can blow a kiss, but kiss is about connecting, right? So she was trying to use that. In The Queen, he uses sound in a lot of different ways. He uses repetition in terms of sound. He uses sound in lots of different kinds of ways inside of that poem. So, so I wanted to go as far as the 5 senses. So let me take a peek at the time. Perfect, 6:23. So I want you to, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the next assignment, okay? So we won't see each other until Monday, September 13th, right? Because next week, Monday's Labor Day, and then there's no class on Tuesdays and Wednesdays because the school is, and I think Hostos is open, it's just, there's no class on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think there is a religious holiday that's happening those days, but for our rhythm, we don't have class next week. So so for next week, I want you to read the rest of the poetry. And it's a lot of poems, and I'm going to just be okay with saying you could skim it. Like that means you can read the main topics and the poems. But basically, we're going to talk about next week how there are open forms and closed forms, right? And I just want you to know that for instance, I think the first form we work with is a sonnet, right? The first one on your thing. And basically a sonnet, just to kind of give you a little bit of a preview, there's rules, right? So there's rules to how the poem is going to be written. And in the sonnet, it has 14 lines, right? It has a specific rhyme scheme. And I didn't talk a lot about rhyme scheme, we just talked about rhyming, but there's a rhyme scheme. And there's the Shakespearean sonnet, which is one of the most popular ones. And so we'll read a Shakespeare sonnet next time, but you'll see that one in the packet. But you could look at what the different bullet points are. There's a sonnet, there's a ballad, there's a haiku, there's a villanelle, there's a rondeau, there's different types of closed forms. And each one of those forms has rules. Like a haiku, many people know, a haiku has to have 3 lines, and it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, 5, 7, 5. So when people are writing haikus, they use that structure, that form, that closed form to write it. But we'll talk more about closed forms when we see each other again in a couple weeks. So I want you to read that part. But for today, I wanted us to talk about the senses. I wanted to talk about sound and poetry. I wanted us to talk about metaphors and similes, and all of these as effects. Next time, we'll talk more about the rhyme scheme, and we'll talk about meter, and we'll talk about some more things. We'll keep building our vocabulary. But so by the time we meet each other, we would have read the entire Element of Poetry packet, and we'll be picking stuff from it as we continue building. For the next class, thank you for the assignment for the next class, and I will send you more info on it. But I would like us to, one of the things in poetry is symbolism, right? And symbolism is something, is when sometimes it could be objects, it could be language, it could be words that are one thing but mean another thing, right? And so an example I'm going to give you is from the first poem for you, the idea that I was talking about today, right? The idea of being in the dark. Being in the dark is a symbol, like the darkness is a symbol, right? That a darkness is a symbol for the unknown, a darkness is for the symbol of for familiarity, right? It's like also for like knowing something by heart. Like you could be in the dark and know something by heart, right? So it's not only about the unknown, but the darkness in a first poem for you symbolizes something, right? Symbolizes lots of things. In the Queen, right? There's also literally the Queen themselves symbolizes something, right? The crown is a symbol, right? We said it's not a real crown, right? So that sometimes symbols could be objects, symbols could be ideas, symbols could be lots of different things inside of a poem. So for in a couple weeks, let me actually just get the actual. Let me show you in Blackboard, because I don't know if the paragraph assignment is up yet, but not in Blackboard in our. And then we're going to read a poem because it's almost 6:30. Sure. Let me take a look at the chat, because I think some of you, Malin.
Is this the assignment that's due on the 12th? That's on the Blackboard?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and it's the Queen, right? That
Yes.
we're.
I'm gonna say the Queen, but I'm also, since we've I talked a lot about a first poem for you. If somebody wanted to do a first poem for you, you could do that one as well. You could pick one. I'm gonna talk about that now.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
so that's why I'm gonna update the assignment. So the assignment normally would just focus on the Queen, but since we spent a lot of time on both poems, and I already got the feeling from your responses that some of you are feeling one kind of way about one poem as opposed to another. So I'm gonna give you the opportunity to pick either one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, then let me go to. Yes, okay, cool. Thank you, Gregory, for letting me know that I already did it. So I thought it wasn't in there. So we could delete this poetry reflection from 9-1. I'm not gonna have you do another poetry reflection. But what you will do is, so you're gonna write one paragraph, at least 5 sentences, identifying, describing symbolism in the Queen. And then here there's more, I'm gonna open this up. Yeah, I think this is what we're gonna do today. I'm gonna finish with this, screen share. Let's talk about it. Okay, so in terms of the writing assignment, right? Symbolism is one of the things that happens inside of poetry. So so it's an object, a concept, a word does not have to be limited to a single meaning. Symbolism is a literary device that uses symbols, be they words, people, marks, locations, or abstract ideas to represent something that beyond the literal meaning. The poem, The Queen, has many symbols. Write one paragraph, at least 5 sentences, identifying and describing symbolism and Pablo Neruda's The Queen. I'm going to update this so we could also include or from Kinetonesio's first poem for you, because like the tattoos themselves are symbols, right? We talked about, you know, the permanence of them, the serpent and the dragon, and there's all this stuff going on. So I want you to all have as many things available for you to be able to craft this paragraph. So keep in mind your paragraph should name the poet and the poem, and it should define symbolism and quote the poem to give an example of what you identify as a symbol. So I put a little sample here of an Emily Dickinson poem and with a paragraph. So see the paragraph below. I heard a fly buzz when I died by Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is also an American poet, and she is very famous. She's been translated into many languages, just like Pablo Neruda has. And one of the quirky things about Emily Dickinson is that actually a lot of her poems were found after she passed. She was a recluse, and meaning that she didn't go out much, and did a lot of correspondence, but wrote a lot of her poetry, but they found lots of it after she passed. So here is I'll say more about Emily Dickinson another time. So I heard a fly buzz when I died is her poem. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering from the last onset when the king be witnessed in the room. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there, interposed, a fly, with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see, right? So it is literally about her dying and a fly being in the room, right? Kind of like that could just be a simple description of it. But of course, anything that looks simple in poetry, you will know that it is not, right? So I heard a fly buzz when I died. She's also working with sound. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry, right? People around them, their eyes crying, right? And breaths were gathering for the last onset when the king be witnessed in the room, right? This person, whether it's, you know, again, male, female, we don't know, but it's like this idea that's like not just anybody dying, but anyone dying is like a king, somebody significant, right? And then it said, I willed my keepsakes, right? I gave the things that were important to me, right? I willed them, meaning I designated who gets them, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there, interposed, a fly. Like I did all the things that I had to do to put things in order. But then there it was, one of the last images, thoughts, a fly, right? Buzzing in the room with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. And then the windows failed, right? And then I could not see to see. So the ending of that poem is the person dying, right? The windows failed doesn't mean that the windows literally failed. What comes
Her
through the
eyes
window?
closing.
Yes, her eyes closing, right? And then I could not see to see, right? And so that person. So here's a sample paragraph. In her poem, I heard a fly buzz when I died, Emily Dickinson. So I say in your instructions, make sure that, and some of you did this, that you name the poem and the poet when you're doing this, right? So in her poem, I heard a fly buzz when I died. Emily Dickinson uses symbolism, right? You state what it is you're doing. Then you describe it. Symbolism is any object, word, or image or thing that represents something other than its actual meaning, right? So that imagine that somebody never heard the word symbolism, so you explain it to them. Most of the symbolism in the poem can be found as the fly in her room. In the poem, the narrator is lying on his or her deathbed with her friends and family surrounding her. Dickinson writes, I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness of the room was like the stillness of the air. The appearance of a fly can be seen as evil or an omen or a negative symbol. The fly can also signify the end of her life, much like flies can fly around a dead animal. Fly can also symbolize something deeper. Given how orderly this death is, with everyone present and affairs in order, the fly could symbolize a disruption of that order. This is implied in the next section. I willed my keepsakes and signed away what portion of me assignable, and then it was there, interposed, a fly. So the fly can symbolize a disruption to the order and a sign, and the sign that death has arrived, right? So this is taking the idea of the fly and giving it, explaining what the symbols could mean. So I gave you that as an example of structure, and I want you to look at the beginning of it, where you name the poem, you name the poet. In this case, I'm telling you to do symbolism. You could have done imagery, you could do something else. You could have done something else, but I'm asking you to do symbolism. And then to explain what is symbolism, right? So the person knows, you define what the term it is. If it was imagery, if it was sound, if it was something else, theme, I would want you to explain what those things are. This time we're going to stick to symbolism. Name the poet, name the poem, state what the item is, the element you're going to discuss, and then define the element, right? And then give the examples, right? And if you look at the paragraph, they said, in one case, they said, this is what I think it means, and here's a line. And then they said, here's a line, and this is what I think the line means, right? So when you talk about, let's say the crystal crown as a symbol, right? That you will say in the line, in the poem, it says, here's a crystal crown, and this is what it means. It means that whatever it is, whatever the symbol you think the symbols of it means. So, so that's what I would like you to do for, let me just get the date right. I believe, you have a little bit of time, but yes, by Sunday, actually the Sunday by 11:59 p.m. before we come back, before the 12th, right? So by Sunday, 11:59 p.m., I want you to do that. And then, like I said, finish reading the rest of by class next time, finish reading the rest of the Elements of Poetry handout. Right, so those are two things that you need to do. And for those of you who did not get me your assignments, please, for the last assignment, please get that so I can comment on it. And then also, like, I know we're off next week, and take your time off. You need your time off. But if any of you wanted to speak later this week, or even next week, if you wanted to look at your comments and have time to speak to me about it, I would be happy and open to speak with you about anything that is not clear. That I did on your page. So for those of you who didn't get it, you don't know what I'm talking about, but get me your assignment, and then I'll do my comments on it, and then we could also have, you can also write on that and write back to me on it. So, but just give me a heads up that you've replied to it, because so that way I'll know that. Any questions about what is expected? Yes. Correct. We're going to read the rest of it up to the end. Yeah.
I have a question. The symbolism paragraph will be on both poem, or just on the queen?
Just one. I'm on the right now. The assignment says the queen, but I'm verbally telling you that I'm going to update it and include a first poem for you in case any of you. So you will have a choice, right? You can choose the queen, or you can choose first poem for you. If any of you want to go for it and you want to look at whatever, I read some other poem today. What did I read today? Yeah, we didn't go into it. The Edgar Allan Poe poem, or if you see a poem in the packet that you say, you know what, I think I read this poem. I want to try doing symbolism on that one. We could do that. I only suggested the ones we talked about because we've had an opportunity to discuss some of it. And it's important for us to, it's important, what's important now is that now we got it in our brain. So now how do we put it down on the page, right? So that's what this assignment is about. How do you actually write
And
out?
it's only a paragraph, right?
Only
So,
one paragraph.
yeah, so you can't really talk about the other ones even if you wanted to. Right?
Well, if you wanted to do two, I would look at two paragraphs if any of you felt inspired and wanted to do that. But I'm letting you know the requirement is to focus on one. We're building, right? Hopefully we'll write the paragraph. We're building toward our essay. So next week I'll talk, when we come back next week, I'll explain, then I'll give you a handout and we'll talk about the essay, actual essay itself. But we're going to talk a little bit more about writing an essay, So I'll give you a handout for that next week, and then we'll be talking a little bit more the different elements of writing an essay. Now you've all, because this is English 111, you've all written essays. So I know that, right? Because you all came from like 110 or 100, or you did essays somewhere else. So for us, really, it's just about refreshing it, making sure that we're on the same page before we embark on getting the assignment. So yeah, so the writing the paragraph is like part of the scaffolding or the building blocks of an essay. So I want to see I saw how you expressed yourself, and I want to see you construct the paragraph, okay? And the paragraph is the beginning, that stating of what the symbolism is, that another word for that statement is a topic sentence, right? A topic sentence, this is what this paragraph, the topic of the sentence is this, right? So that's what a topic sentence is.
Yeah. All right, Professor, 2 questions. So the assignment, do we submit it by email or do we submit it through the thread?
You will submit it in the thread, okay?
So my second question was, when I took English 110, when we submitted our assignments, we had to have like this format.
I will talk about the format next class,
okay.
Right? And we'll give you a handout for that too. The MLA, the format, your name, my name, the class, the date, and all that. How do you format the first page? We will build to that.
But this is going through the thread, so.
Yes, just put a paragraph. Just
Exactly.
construct your paragraph.
Great, thank you.
Professor Rice, this is Shaquana Perry. So I was a few minutes late for class, and I just want to be sure that I am marked on the attendance.
Oh, yes. So just so you know, the Zoom records when everybody signs in and when everybody signs out. So, so I have the attendance. Any other questions about the assignments or?
I have a question. This is actually my first time in this class.
Welcome, Thelma.
I'm sorry. It's just I registered late and I don't want to be behind on work. I know you do record the class, I see. Is there any way that I could go over your recordings from your past class and get an idea exactly what I need to do?
Starting next class, well, first of all, you have access to our Blackboard class, right? Their class on Blackboard.
Yes.
So make sure that you look at the syllabus is on there, and that we have and our assignments and the course content and everything I've been talking about is in there. There's a section for poetry, and so you'll see there's handouts and there's a poetry packet with poems in it. So we haven't really delved into that packet yet, but this elements of poetry that we've been talking about is in there. So if you look at the syllabus, so far I've been following it. So if you look at the syllabus, that'll help you stay on track with it. And there was just one assignment that was, we discussed 2 poems, and you could do your best with them. And I'll put I'll try to get it before the weekend. I try not to promise things that I can't get them in time. So that's why I said definitely by Monday, I'll have it done. But if I get it done sooner, I'll just send everybody an email so the classes are up. And that way you'll be able to see them and you can hear the discussion we had about the 2 poems that we were talking about today, of the Queen and a first poem for you. But
okay,
the assignment
perfect.
was for you to write your reflections on those poems. And so that's what folks were doing, that was due the other night.
Okay, I'll do that actually tonight. I'll take a look at it and send it's through Blackboard that I have to write like a paragraph in regards to the passage or
So
story.
Thelma, just hang out a little bit, if you can. Can you hang out a little bit after class is done? And I could show you a little bit more. And anybody is welcome to, because sometimes people like to see it 10 times and I'll show it to you 10 times. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Blackboard and I'm going to show Thelma where everything is at. So, but I just don't want to. So if anybody else has questions about the assignments and what.
Yes, sir. How are we going to submit this assignment?
You're going to go into Blackboard and you're going to go to the thread. And actually, let me share my screen really quickly, and this will help. This will be the beginning of it. So I'm going to share the screen, and then let me close this out. This is the syllabus. Close all tabs. Okay, here we go. So when you go to Blackboard, right, this is our class, and you look down the side, there's a section called discussions. That's where all the assignments will be. So this one right now here just talks about the Queen. but since today I just decided to update it, I will change it. I'm going to change it to include first poem for you. And then you do it the way you would do your poetry reflection. You're going to open it up, right? You're going to create a thread. You're going to give it a name, you know, like, you know, symbolism. And then you start, you know, in, you know, if you type it somewhere else, you'll copy and paste it in here. And then you're going to hit submit.
Can we use
And
Word
then-
document and upload it there?
You could do that as well. Yes, I'm gonna talk more about uploading Word documents, but if you would like to upload a Word document and do it that way, that's when you can certainly do that as well. You can upload, one of you did that. I mean, I forget what one of your classmates uploaded their work in a Word document. I think it was Cesar, and then he sent it as another separate documents. Or maybe it wasn't him, maybe he just did it twice, but it was somebody who updated it as a Word document. So
yeah, it was me.
Anybody else have questions about the assignment or what we need to do? If not, then I will release you into the night so that you could do the things that you need to do. I'm going to ask Thelma to stay on so I could show her a little bit more about Blackboard, and anybody else who wants to stay and watch us could do that. Let me check the chat to make sure I don't have anything hanging in the chat. And okay, the Queen in the second poem. Okay, first poem. Thank you guys. No questions. Thank you. I need to talk. Okay, yes. So Johanny, you could wait a little bit too if you want to talk afterward. So I'm gonna show Thelma a little bit of better Blackboard, and Johanny, you can stay on and we could talk. And if anybody else needs to talk, just stay on. If not, good night. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you all in a week and a half.
All right, everyone have a nice sleep.
Thank you,
Night,
Professor.
Professor.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Tamara. All right. Good night. All right, Thelma, I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
And so if you come to our class, I mean, if you sign into the class, there's the main 3 tabs is this one here, the syllabus, the course content, and discussions. The syllabus, if you click it, I'm not going to click it here, but if you click that, our syllabus would open up, and I think it's opened up somewhere around here. Maybe not, I'll just open it. So if you click
I
it.
had printed, yeah, I had just printed it out now in
Okay, so
my
you got it.
printer.
Great.
Yeah.
So you should definitely read that over because it's good information there. And then the other section is course content. And right now we're going to do 3 sections. We're going to do poetry, we're going to do fiction, and we're going to do drama, like theater. So if you right now there's the poetry folders there. So you click the poetry folder, you're going to see elements of poetry, which is a handout that well, you have to read the whole thing by the time we see each other. Then there's the poetry packet here. And then this is, we're gonna start dealing with this essay when we get back from our mini break next week. But if you click the poetry packet, it's basically it's a packet I create of all the poems that we will be examining in the class. And, and it's just the table of contents and then all the poems. This is the Queen is the poem that I read to the class, and then and we explored, and the other one is First Poem for You, which is, so these poems are in the packet. Then the other place that's important, like I said, is discussions. And so if we go to discussions right now, you'll see the first assignment, all of the students, put their first assignments here. They created a thread and put it in. And the next one, I'm gonna delete this one. Can I do it right now? Let me see.
So the poetry reflections is on the story of the queens. Basically, we have to read about, on
the Queen and on First Poem for You. So it was on both of them. And I think I'll look for the email, because I think I have to make sure that you're on our email list so that you get the emails and you get the assignments, because very often I follow up after I talk about it in class. I'll just send an email out to folks. Like I'm going to do the follow-up now with this one, maybe not tonight, But I'm gonna, or maybe tonight with this one to include first poem for you on it. But this is the other
Okay,
important part. So you know that for the assignments, or somebody did it. Did somebody do it? No, that was me giving the example. But and then you would put it in here. And so I think that's the basic stuff that you need to know.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much for taking your time and showing
Of
me.
course, no problem. All right, take care.
You too. Have a good day.
So, Johanna, you're here, and yeah, no, definitely in private. We'll do it in private. But I'm just going to check with Kapadanu if are you online, or do you have a question? Because sometimes people leave, but they don't leave. Right. So Kapadanu, I'm just going to put you in a waiting room in case you're there. Okay. And then I'm going to check back with you in case you have a question. So I'm going to just put you in the waiting room. So that, and then I'm going to stop recording. Hold on one second.